I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Turrbal, Jagera, and Yugambeh speaking nations. We acknowledge their ongoing spiritual connection and cultural connection to the lands and waters we live and work on. We recognize First Peoples' ancestral birthing knowledge and that birthing on country has occurred for tens of thousands of years, connecting spirit to land. Pay respects to the elders past, present, and emerging, extending this to all First Peoples watching today. Throughout my life, I have not had a set place of living. In my more formative high school years, I called Cairns Gimya Wallabara Yindi home, more specifically the Yidinji area of Cairns. Cairns was and still is a very densely populated area with First Peoples. My upbringing and narrative from my parents surrounding First Peoples was not positive, so I've grown up with a negatively tinted lens when viewing First Peoples. This is a narrative I am striving to change, to scrape away the tint, particularly as a midwifery student who is practicing in a woman-centered way. This practice encompasses women from all backgrounds and walks of life. I'm striving to understand First Peoples women's ways of knowing and the connection they have with their land. Upon reflection of the communities I live, work, and study in, there seems to be a limited recognition of First Peoples. There are no Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander flags with the little artwork on the walls of the school my children attend. There is no visibility for First Peoples culture where I work and where I study. It is reflected in the artworks hanging in corridors of the hospital. There is definitely better representation and visibility for First Peoples in other communities, as I have heard other students reflect on their communities and how inclusive there are. The Joint Birthing on Country position statement looks at improving life expectant equality between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples with other Australians by 2030. There is also another strategy called Closing the Gap, which has looked at the differences in health equality between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and other Australians, looking to close the health expectancy gap. Closing the Gap strategies highlight the importance of maternity care for First Peoples women and babies. First People women have been advocating for many years that birthing on country will improve maternal and infant outcomes, as they highlighted the integral connection between birthing, land, and places of belonging. This brings back autonomy, power, and decision-making to First Peoples women. The Birthing on Country model highlights the core values First People women have around birthing on country. It states that women are community-based and governed, provide inclusive traditional practices, involve connection with the land and country, incorporate a holistic dimension of health, value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, as well as other ways of knowing and learning. They encompass risk assessment and service delivery and are culturally competent. The current model of care for Aboriginal women does not encompass this and typically removes them from ancestral lands, away from their community and where they are spiritually connected. From my experience so far in mainstream hospital care, not a lot of midwives are adhering to this model of care, do not understand how to respectfully interact with First Peoples women, referring them directly through to birth centres for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, instead of learning how to be culturally competent. Birthing on country does not align well with birthing on clinical placement. There is no acknowledgement of history for First Peoples women and babies and the negative impact that colonisation had in relation to the power and self-determination of First Peoples women. There's little respect for diversity of First Peoples culture through clinical reflection on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultural beliefs and practices within the local community context, which has been outlined previously. There doesn't seem to be much knowledge within the hospital system of what First Peoples women find important to them and their cultural needs. Cultural safety, explored from the perspective of First women childbearing needs is not very well met or understood. Health equality, using social justice and human rights-based approach to health and healthcare system accessed by responding to differences between the groups of people and to attain full health potential, which kind of leads back into closing the gap, which was mentioned before. Models of care for First Women peoples, women, babies and families. The models can be used effectively in a BIOC, MGP or Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women model, where they have an identified midwife. First Peoples midwives don't seem to want to self-identify within the mainstream hospital care. Could this possibly be due to cultural biases or warrior-facing prejudice? The principles of birthing on country align perfectly with the midwifery meta-values. So shifting to a birthing on country model should not be very difficult for the midwives adhering to the meta-values. Some of the key values include being woman-centered, that birth is normal, a model of continuity of care, which a lot of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women are receiving through the MGP or BIOC models, to be practicing in a culturally safe and respectful way, being clinically reflective. It's important to build a respectful, safe and trustworthy relationship with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women when caring for them, to recognise a woman's way of knowing, being and doing in the context of their history with colonisation, their culture and the diversity